Perry. I'm an editor here at Hodder, and I'm delighted to be here today with Rebecca Levene, the author of SMILER'S FAIR and the forthcoming The Hunter's Kind. Hi, Bex.
Hello.
So, can you tell us a little bit about SMILER'S FAIR and the world of SMILER'S FAIR, and maybe a little bit about how you came up with the idea originally?
Well, one of the ways I came up with the idea originally for the world of SMILER'S FAIR was a lot of people laugh about the maps in the fronts of fantasy books, and I thought, is there a way to get away from that? And one way seemed to be to have a world of nomads. And so I thought about what would create a world like that. And it seemed to me that if something lived below the ground, something really dangerous, that could only thrive in the shadows, so if you kept the ground shadowed, it could emerge and destroy you, then everyone would have to move on, no one could live in permanent buildings. And so that was a sort of starting off point for my world, and then I came up with the war that left these creatures below the ground, and the different societies that found different ways of being nomadic. And then of course in the end I had to have a map anyway, because you still have geographical features, but that was the starting off point.
Well, I'll have you know that my mom is really, really glad there's a map at the front of SMILER'S FAIR, which she loved, but yeah, she was really confused about where things were happening.
Yeah.
So delighted that there was a map there.
My friends have been reading The Hunter's Kind for me in draft form and going, but we need a map.
Okay, so tell me a little bit about what happens in SMILER'S FAIR. No spoilers, obviously.
Okay. Well, SMILER'S FAIR opens at the fair itself, which is the one city in this section of the world, and the way it can be a city is by permanently moving. What it does is it sets up camp at a place in the world, this huge, sprawling city that was partly inspired by sort of medieval London and partly by modern-day Marrakesh, actually. And they stay there until the first person dies, until the first person is eaten by the monsters beneath the ground, and they know it's time to move on. And it's a den of vice and iniquity, but also of freedom. It's a place people can go to escape the strictures of their own lands. And various characters start off the book in the fair, including Krish, who never quite makes it there, but he's the goatherd who is not actually quite what he thinks. We find out what he is. He's the son of the king. He is the son of the king, and also the heir of the moon god.
Tell me a bit about The Hunter's Kind.
The Hunter's Kind picks up where the action of SMILER'S FAIR leaves off, with Krish on the run. I don't want to give too much away about SMILER'S FAIR, and various people after him. It also introduces some new characters, some friends and some enemies, and opens up some sort of whole new regions of the world in the traditional style of fantasy novels. And I suppose if SMILER'S FAIR was asking its characters, who are you? How do you define yourself? And do other people get to define you? Then The Hunter's Kind is asking them, how far will you go? Just what will you do to get what you want? And looking at the answer to that for all my different characters and the consequences of that answer.
Well, you've described it rather memorably, the entire series, as being kind of like Breaking Bad set in the fantasy world. Can you explain that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, something I wanted to look at, something I feel very strongly about, is this idea that suffering is an ennobling thing. And I think it can lead into quite serious real-world consequences, where people's commentary on various conflicts around the world is, why are these people not behaving better? They've suffered, do they not understand? They're now making other people suffer. But actually, the truth is, I think, that mostly when people really suffer, it's very corrosive. It makes them behave very badly, because suffering is very destructive. And what I wanted to look at was who these people are who become the villains of a traditional fantasy book, and why they become those people. These people who, and this is not happening so much in modern day fantasy, but in the traditional fantasy I grew up reading in the 80s, who were sort of the hordes from the east, who tended to be fairly faceless, who tended to be motiveless. And I want to look about actually who are those people, why do they do the things they do, and also within that look at the people who tended to be the others within a lot of fantasy novels, gay people, women, anyone who's not white, and the majority of the cast of the book aren't white. And I discovered actually, slightly to my surprise, it wasn't intentional, that none of my viewpoint characters were straight white men. But I thought, I'm quite pleased with that, and I've kept that up in future books.
So you've actually told me in conversation quite a lot about the process of world building, and how you actually had to go and basically not just create a world, but build an anthropology for the world.
Yeah, because I did my degree in social anthropology, so I've had to convince myself that these societies could be functional. So the starting off point would be, how do they cope with the fact that they can't build anything permanent? And I came up with various answers to that. In the first book, there are the people who, the wealthy, live on these massive ship forts floating on lakes, which are dragged around them by mammoths, and the poor live in caravans, which are moved every couple of weeks, or the very poorest in tents. but then within that, I thought, well, what would that do to their marriage rituals? What would that do to their attitudes to gender? What are their attitudes to gender? And also, what's their history? I mean, I found for the kingdom of Shani's Land, which is the sort of central kingdom of the first book, although most of the action doesn't take place there, I actually wrote a history going back about 700 years. I wrote a potted history, little history of each king. Not that I would ever use it, but I felt like I needed to know it.
Well, you know, George R. R. Martin just published The World of Ice and Fire, which was his notes for the book, so
yeah.
You never know.
Yeah, it's true. Yeah.
Okay, what's Ree? What is she?
She is a giant, talking, armoured, very bad-tempered bat. She's possibly my favourite character in the book.
I was going to ask, who's your favourite character?
Yeah, I think I love her, and I love Eric, who she interacts mostly with, who is a lovelorn rent boy who goes off and has almost a fairy tale adventure, is how I sort of saw it with the giant bat and various other people in the icy north.
Now he's very separate from everything else that's happening in SMILER'S FAIR. Does he come back in The Hunter's Kind?
He absolutely is in The Hunter's Kind, and you'll see in The Hunter's Kind how his story begins to converge with the main plot. I hope in SMILER'S FAIR it becomes apparent how important his story is to the main story, but yeah, I can promise it will be more interlinked by the end of The Hunter's Kind.
Can you tell us anything about the next couple of books?
I am planning for book 3 to have a bit of a time jump. Still with the same characters, but we're going to find them in a new situation, and some of the book will be finding out just how they got into that new situation. I suppose the third book, if there's a question that's asked the characters, it's can you escape your past, and can you escape the things that you've done in the preceding 2 books, particularly in The Hunter's Kind. And yeah, the fourth book is where it all basically hits the fan.
Awesome. As if it hadn't already hit the
yes.
fan in book 1.
More of it hits a bigger fan.
Awesome. Well, is there anything else that you would like to say about the series?
I hope everyone enjoys it. Yeah, and if you do enjoy it, let me know on Twitter, or if you've got anything to say to me or any questions. It's always nice to hear from people who are reading it. It's a bit of an isolating thing, writing, sort of chucking words into a void. I mean, well, to your editor as well. And getting feedback is incredibly important.
Great. Well, thanks very much for joining us today and answering all of my questions.
My pleasure.
The end.